Okay, hello everybody. It's Paul Power here. We got a little conversation with Robert Nelson. This is January 10th, 2019, and he's just gonna spend some time talking about various alien contacts and personages that that he's dealt with, and some of which I've dealt with as well, and been around to share what the interactions were. So here we go.
Okay. First of all, I want to say that it's amazing to me now that we are on the edge of this, what I'm going to call, age of disclosure. It's high time. And there are a lot of people working on this in their own different ways. I look at the whole concept of UFOs/ETs as being under like a wall, a dome-shaped wall that's kept the public in the dark, and that everyone who's working on the disclosure project, as they call it, from different angles and different information sources and in different ways, is like a sledgehammer chipping away at that wall, little by little by little. Only it seems like it's actually being sped up. That's great. So, in my own way, I'm doing my own part. Some of you have probably seen some of the earlier videos about my experiences with extraterrestrials in this life. I can give a little more info on that and maybe fill in some more gaps, so to speak. To deal with the first of the races that I came in, or cultures if you'd rather call it that, species I came in contact with, we'd have to go back to when I was about 4 years old in this lifetime. Like most children, I was afraid at nighttime of the dark, with good reason. And most children are. That's normal. I totally get that. I understand that. I was afraid of what could come out of the dark to get me. And did, many times. I have to turn the Wayback Machine a little further back. I was born to an extraterrestrial father and a human mother who tried for 7 years to have a child, and according to my father's doctor, something was different about a semen and they were never going to have a child. And then I came along. I was born a month premature. I spent the first 2 weeks of my life in an incubator. And then after that, this world was toxic to me. Every damn germ that came along I caught, many times over. By the age of 6, we didn't know if I was going to be around long. Even the day that my tonsils were to be removed, I was starting a strep throat. But the surgeons were telling my doctor and my parents, look, we've scheduled this before, and every time we schedule a tonsillectomy, he gets sick. So there's never going to be a good, healthy, proper time. Normally we would not operate on someone who's got an infection. But in this case, he might not be around long enough to reschedule. So they did the operation. And contrary to what people are often told, after my tonsils were out, no, I did not feel like eating all the ice cream I could eat. Didn't want anything. Going back to age of 4, I used to think of them as the doctors who don't come from here. I didn't know what to call them. I was a little kid. To me, they were like other kids because they were short. Today we would call them the typical Greys, quote marks. Often they would appear to me as something different, or as, like Greys, or they would appear to me as human children. I think that was not shape-shifting, I think it was telepathic screening. One thing about the Greys, they are extremely psychic. Well, so am I. A lot of times I try to dull it down so I don't pick up what people are thinking, because I don't want to know. It's not my business. But there were, at times, what I call insect-looking types. Now, I know a lot of people say there's a mantis type. I can't say they really look like praying mantis. They looked like people, but very spindly. Spindly arms, long spindly legs. Very thin central section of their body. Their heads somewhat larger than the human head, with a high, what they call a nuchal crest. Sort of like the crest you'd see on some of the old helmets of the knights back in the medieval times. But the skin would be stretched over that. And their skin coloring would be kind of a yellowish white. Kind of a sickish yellowish white. They seemed to be in command of everything. They were floating. I never saw them walking around until they shape-shifted, which I do believe was actual shape-shifting on their part. So these insectoid types, there were usually 2 of them. In one case, one of them became like everybody's sweet, plump, lovable, white-haired grandmother, like Mrs. Santa Claus. And I did see her lips move, and I heard her speak. Like, hi, hi, Sonny, this is going to be okay. You're going to be fine. The kind of, as you would expect to hear from a little old lady. The other dude turned into some middle-aged man I didn't recognize at all. Plaid shirt, seersucker trousers that were popular back then. Kind of salt and pepper hair coloring. Short hair coloring, short haircut. They told me they were going to put a needle, a spindle, in my head. And I protested against it, as any child would. And then they said that, especially the little old lady said, "Yeah, this won't hurt a bit, you'll be fine." Yeah, right. Anyway, there was a bright flash of light, blinding light, and then pain back behind my eyes and into the back of my head, sort of. I think it lasted about 10 minutes. I told them I was going to tell my parents about them. They told me to go ahead, and that if I did, they would come get my parents and take them away and hurt them and never bring them back again. So I stayed quiet for 41 years to protect my parents. At times they took blood from me. They did other things to me that made me feel strange and dirty. And I didn't know why. I don't think any little child should have to feel dirty about him or herself. But part of what they did might have had a hand in my being gay. I don't know that as a fact. It's something I just have an internal awareness of, and I can't put it in any different words than that. as time went on, when I guess I must have been about 4 or 5. I remember one evening my mom was saying bedtime prayers with me, and I saw these what looked like, I say beach balls because they were about as big as a child's beach ball would be, but they didn't look like beach balls. They didn't have that plastic look to them in different colors, bright colors, nothing like that. They looked like brown, see-through, speckly, sparkly a little bit, with a light golden rim around the outside of them. And they were slow motion, moving, bouncing through the air. There were 3 of them coming down the hallway to my bedroom. I saw this in my mind's eye, and I remember thinking, they're like God because they could kill me. And I thought of them, and I thought of the word watchers. I didn't know why I thought of that word. I had never heard of that, watchers, before. I knew what a watch was that a person would wear, or if you're watching something happen, I knew what that was. But I knew they were watching me for somebody else, and that whoever that somebody else was, they weren't very nice, and that maybe they wanted to kill me. If you could imagine how much I'm shivering inside right now, just thinking about it again. Many times I would end up being in a round room somewhere. Usually it was really white, light lit up, rounded room. Today we'd say dome shaped. I didn't know that word back then. I knew rounded and I knew ball. Equipment was wedged into the wall. Nothing on screws, hooks, nails, or hangers like what we do. I don't remember being with other human children. I do remember the Greys looking at times like human children. Playing with me. I don't mean games. To move it forward a bit, when I was going back to when I was 4, another type of non-terrestrial I've had dealings with is the Archangel Michael. My mom, when I was 4 years old, told me one time at bedtime prayers, you have a guardian angel watching over you. I have to explain, we were Protestant. In the Protestant faith, angels exist, we're aware of them, they're helpers, they're rescuers at times, they're messengers from God, but that's it. God and Christ get the attention, not the angels. And all of a sudden in my mind's eye, I'm seeing, standing at the head of my bed, a being so tall, made of white with a hint of yellow light to it, mostly white. Sword poised down at rest. And it's funny, back in that time, we didn't have TV till I was 6 years old. Well, I didn't know anything about a double-handed sword. What I knew was Captain Hook in the coloring books and Peter Pan, one hand, holding the sword handle. This dude standing here like this, sword poised down at the floor, wings up through the ceiling. And he looked at me. He was graceful. He looked like a late teenage, early 20-year-old. It was hard for me to tell. I mean, he was an adult, I was a kid. But kind of curlyish hair. He looked at me and gave a very brief hint of a smile and a brief hint of a nod and was gone. I'm bringing him in now because he's important later on. When I was about 11, I began experimenting with ESP, extrasensory perception. Telepathy, as they're calling it again nowadays. The old-fashioned term was telepathy, then it went to ESP. I think it's going back to telepathy again now. I sucked. I was lousy at it. I bombed. I remember one time my mom coming to me and saying, "Bob, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but you know, I know you're interested in ESP, but you don't seem to have much of it. I think everybody has at least a little." And she said, "I think you and I have a little together, because mother and son, but I just don't see where you're really demonstrating it." That was when I was 11. By the time I reached the age of 14, terms like ESP, reincarnation, thought transference, anything metaphysical was fever-pitched conversation every day in our house. Both my parents and me. It wasn't just me talking about it. Because my skills were growing like mad, exponentially. It was to the point at that time where my mom was saying, "I'm amazed by some of the things you're doing, but please promise me you'll never forget who your source is." And I told her, I said, "There's no way that could happen. That's God." I could never forget that. One night when I was 14, I went to bed. Everything seemed normal, whatever that is for me. I woke up the next morning, and I'm not trying to be funny or anything, but perhaps it'll pick up on the camera. You can see this little red, brownish iron mark circle thing here. Well, that next morning when I woke up, there was about a 3-inch long raised place. What in the world? About 2.5 inches in width. It was semicircular, flat on this side, raised on this side, and you could push your hand up against it. It's not as prominent now as it used to be.
That dark spot right there?
Right in the middle of it.
Okay.
It's like something was pumped in there. It showed up so much my mom saw it as I was changing my shirt that morning. She freaked out. I couldn't tell her, "Oh, Mom, I was on a spacecraft last night and they stopped my heart and restarted it." Because again, I was worried they'd come get my parents, take them away and hurt them and never bring them back again. Now, that was in the 60s. Everybody was afraid of leukemia. My dad, who was a supervising principal in the area at the time, asked my science teacher, unbeknownst to me, to take a look at that and see if he thought it might be cancer of any form. So that next day after science class, next to the last class in the afternoon, kids are filing out. The bell had rung for us to go to our next class. And my science teacher came up and said, "Bob, I need to check with you about something." He told me that my dad had told him about this place on my chest. So I unbuttoned a couple of buttons on my shirt. He looked at it, he pushed his hand against it. He said, "It's solid." He said, "If it was cancer, it would have give to us, so it's probably not cancer." Well, that let us all breathe easy. And I didn't mention it anymore. And my parents didn't mention it anymore. It was good. That was fine with me. To this day, I don't know what was done to me there. I do vaguely remember they stopped my heart from beating and restarted it. I think it was something that was meant as a shut-off. They must have known that later I would become a problem to them, and I did, so that there would be a way they could shut me off permanently. Well, years and years and years later, in the 1990s, I got struck by lightning. And apparently it did something to that device they put in and made it useless. For my whole life, I've felt like I felt like I'm caught in a war and I'm ground zero between different forces fighting back and forth. When we pick it up again, we'll pick up a little further different involvements. Okay?